In the 19th century, reading a poem about nature or death usually meant wading through a highly decorative aesthetic. It was an era of heavy velvet drapes and ornate parlors, and the poetry matched the furniture. Writers approached mortality and religion with flowery language, absolute certainty, and a quiet, serene reverence. Emily Dickinson ignored all of that. She was a reclusive writer living in Massachusetts who left the vast majority of her nearly 1,800 poems unpublished in her lifetime. Instead of grand Victorian sermons, she wrote short, erratic, heavily punctuated verses that often read like cryptic rills. This creates a stylistic gulf between her and her contemporaries. While a popular poet like Longfellow used verse that sounds predictable to the modern ear, Dickinson relied on what scholars call curt Baroque prose, using fragmentary sentence structures and disjunctive syntax that align more closely with 20th century modernism than the sensibilities of the 1860s. This raises a technical question. How did an isolated writer utilize the tools of the 16th and 17th centuries, like the meter and nominal sentence structures of George Herbert, to express an intellectual sensibility that feels essentially like our own? Her timelessness is a matter of mechanical engineering. To understand her genius, we have to look at how she completely dismantled and rebuilt the machinery of a metaphor. A simile is a comparison using like or as. A metaphor makes the comparison directly. For a poet obsessed with efficiency, connective words like and as waste valuable real estate. They force a pause, separating an image from the underlying thought it is trying to express. Looking at this textual analysis of her poetry, we can see exactly how aggressively she abandoned that structure. Out of thousands of lines of verse, the word like is used to initiate a simile in merely 1.5% of them. She ruthlessly filtered out standard, drawn-out descriptions to achieve extreme linguistic compression. When she does deploy a simile, she uses it strictly to startle the reader, comparing the thrill of a withdrawn delight to a bliss like murder. To enforce this extreme compression, she relied on a very specific structural framework. As we can see in this sheet music, standard church hymns and traditional ballads operate on a rigid grid, typically alternating lines of 8 and 6 syllables. Dickinson used this exact meter. By stripping away decorative similes and locking her vocabulary inside this tight metrical box, she left no room for gentle transitions. Abstract ideas and concrete physical realities are forced to violently collide. This friction is the result of her signature technique, writing through the metaphor. She maintains a single, highly compressed conceit without ever pausing to hold the reader's hand or explain the comparison. Notice how this animation maps the connections in one of her poems about the sunset. She directly fuses the sky with a broom and the evening sun with a housewife, leaving shreds of color behind. The words like and as are completely absent. Operating under this kind of compression forces the poet to make rapid associative leaps. In a single poem, Dickinson will jump wildly between seemingly unrelated concepts, moving from the innocence of childhood to a joke about dry wine poetry, to the vivid red of dreams, and suddenly to life inside an egg. Reading these associative leaps is like sitting in the back of a speeding taxi. You have to cling to your seat just to follow her rapid-fire logic as she darts through traffic, throwing out landmarks as she passes them. These leaps are a deliberate structural strategy. By removing the connective tissue of normal sentences, she replicates the chaotic, fragmented speed of actual human thought. We can see this psychological mapping perfected in one of her absolute masterworks, a short poem that begins, "I heard a fly buzz when I died." A Victorian audience expected a deathbed poem to feature a holy, serene transition into the afterlife. Dickinson subverts that grand expectation entirely by centering the narrator's final moments of consciousness on something completely mundane, an annoying, buzzing insect. Look at how this visual parses her description of the insect. She writes of a blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. By assigning visual color and kinetic, physical motion to an auditory sound, she creates synesthesia, a deliberate blending of the senses. This synesthesia perfectly captures a physical reality. It mimics the neurological breakdown, the exact perceptual collapse of a brain slowly losing oxygen and consciousness. Throughout the poem, she relies heavily on dashes. These aren't eccentric punctuation marks. They are deliberate syntactical halts. They isolate the words, forcing the reader to experience the faltering cadence of a failing pulse or a dying breath. By utilizing extreme compression and synesthesia, Dickinson translated the movement of the mind into a structural strategy. She replaced Victorian description with her slippery strategies of indirection, allowing a reader, even a century later, to witness the rare privilege of a mind at work.